On January the 14th, 1922, when Emma Zunz returned home from the Tarbuk and Lowenthal weaving mill, she found a letter at the far end of the entryway to her building. It had been sent from Brazil, and it had informed her that her father had died. She was misled at first by the stamp in the envelope, then the unknown handwriting made her heart flutter. 9 or 10 smudgy lines covered almost the entire piece of paper. Emma read that Senior Meyer had accidentally ingested an overdose of Veronal and died on the 3rd inst in the hospital at Beige. The letter was signed by a resident of the rooming house in which her father had lived, one Fane or Fane, in Rio Grande. He could not have known that he was writing to the dead man's daughter. Emma dropped the letter. The first thing she felt was a sinking in her stomach and a trembling in her knees, then a sense of blind guilt, of unreality, of cold, of fear, then a desire for this day to be past. Then immediately she realized that such a wish was pointless, for her father's death was the only thing that had happened in the world, and it would go on happening endlessly forever after. She picked up the piece of paper and went to her room. Furtively, she put it away for safekeeping in a drawer, as though she somehow knew what was coming. She may already have begun to see the things that would happen next. She was already the person she was to become. In the growing darkness and until the end of that day, Emma wept over the suicide of Manuel Meyer, who in happier days gone by had been Emmanuel Zunz. She recalled summer outings to a small farm near Gualguay. She recalled, or tried to recall, her mother. She recalled the family's little house in Llanos that had been sold at auction. She recalled the yellow lozenges of a window, recalled the verdict of prison, the disgrace, the anonymous letters with the newspaper article about the embezzlement of funds by Teller. Recalled, and this she would never forget, but on the last night, her father had sworn that the thief was Aaron Lowenthal, formerly the manager of the mill and now one of its owners. Since 1916, Emma had kept the secret. She had revealed it to no one, not even to Elsa Erstein, her best friend. Perhaps she shrank from it out of profane incredulity. Perhaps she thought that the secret was the link between herself and the absent man. Lowenthal didn't know she knew. Emma Zunz gleaned from that minuscule fact a sense of power. She did not sleep that night, and by the time first light defined the rectangle of the window, she had perfected her plan. She tried to make that day, which seemed interminable to her, be like every other. In the mill, there were rumours of a strike. Emma declared, as she always did, that she was opposed to all forms of violence. At 6, when her workday was done, she went with Elsa to a women's club that had a gymnasium and a swimming pool. They joined. She had to repeat and then spell her name. She had to applaud the vulgar jokes that accompanied the struggle to get it correct. She discussed with Elsa and the younger of the Kronfuss girls which moving picture they would see Sunday evening. And then there was talk of boyfriends. No one expected Emma to have anything to say. In April she would be 19, but men still inspired in her an almost pathological fear. Home again, she made soup thickened with manioc flakes and some vegetables, ate early, went to bed, and forced herself to sleep. Thus passed Friday the 15th, a day of work, bustle, and trivia. The day before the day. On Saturday, impatience wakened her. Impatience, not nervousness or second thought, and the remarkable sense of relief that she had reached this day at last. There was nothing else for her to plan or picture to herself. Within a few hours, she would have come to the simplicity of the fait accompli. She read in La Prensa that the Nordstjernan from Malmo was to weigh anchor that night from Pier 3. She telephoned Lowenthal, insinuated that she had something to tell him in confidence about the strike, and promised to stop by his office at nightfall. Her voice quivered. The quiver befitted a snitch. No other memorable event took place that morning. Emma worked until noon and then settled with Perla Kronfuss and Elsa on the details of their outing on Sunday. She lay down after lunch and with her eyes closed went over the plan she had conceived. She reflected that the final step would be less horrible than the first, and would give her, she had no doubt of it, the taste of victory and of justice. Suddenly alarmed, she leaped out of bed and ran to the dressing-table drawer. She opened it under the portrait of Milton Sills, where she had left it night before last. She found Fane's letter. No one could have seen it. She began to read it, and then she tore it up. To recount with some degree of reality the events of that evening would be difficult, and perhaps inappropriate. One characteristic of hell is its unreality, which might be thought to mitigate hell's terrors, but perhaps make them all the worse. How to make plausible an act in which even she who was to commit it scarcely believed. How to recover those brief hours of chaos that Emma Zunz's memory today repudiates and confuses? Emma lived in Malgre on Cal Liniers. We know that evening she went down to the docks. On the infamous Paseo de Julio, she may have seen herself multiplied in mirrors, made public by lights, and stripped naked by hungry eyes, but it is more reasonable to assume that at first she simply wandered unnoticed through the indifferent streets. She stepped into 2 or 3 bars, observed the routine of the maneuvers of other women. Finally she ran into some men from the Nordstjernan. One of them, who was quite young, she feared might inspire in her some hint of tenderness, so she chose a different one, perhaps a bit shorter than she and foul-mouthed, so that there might be no mitigation of the purity of the horror. The man led her to a door, and then down a gloomy entryway, and then to a tortuous stairway, and then into a vestibule with lozenges identical to those of the house in Lanus, and then down a hallway, and then to a door that closed behind him. The most solemn of events are outside time, whether because in the most solemn of events the immediate past is severed, as it were, from the future, or because the elements that compose those events seem not to be consecutive. In that time outside time, in that welter of disjointed and horrible sensations, did Emma Zunz think even once about the death that inspired the sacrifice? In my view, she thought about it once, and that was enough to endanger her desperate goal. She thought, she could not help thinking, that her father had done to her mother the horrible thing being done to her now. She thought it with weak-limbed astonishment, and then, immediately, took refuge in vertigo. The man, a Swede or Finn, did not speak Spanish. He was an instrument for Emma, as she was for him, but she was used for pleasure, while he was used for justice. When she was alone, Emma did not open her eyes immediately. On the night table was the money the man had left. Emma sat up and tore it to shreds, as she had torn up the letter at a short time before. Tearing up money is an act of impiety, like throwing away bread. The minute she did it, Emma wished she hadn't, an act of pride, and on that day, foreboding melted into the sadness of her body, into the revulsion. Sadness and revulsion lay upon Emma like chains, but slowly she got up and began to dress. The room had no bright colours. The last light of evening made it all the drearier. She managed to slip out without being seen. On the corner she mounted a westbound La Croze, and following her path she sat in the car's frontmost seat so that no one would see her face. Perhaps she was comforted to see, in the banal bustle of the streets, that what had happened had not polluted everything. She rode through gloomy, shrinking neighbourhoods, seeing them and forgetting them instantly, and got off at one of the stops on Wands. Paradoxically, her weariness turned into a strength, for it forced her to concentrate on the details of her mission and masked from her its true nature and its final purpose. Aaron Lowenthal was, in the eyes of all, an upright man, in those of his few closest acquaintances, a miser. He lived above the mill, alone, living in the run-down slum. He feared thieves. In the courtyard of the mill there was a big dog, and in his desk drawer, as everyone knew, a revolver. The year before he had decorously grieved the unexpected death of his wife, a Gauss, who'd brought him an excellent dowry, but money was his true passion. With secret shame he knew he was not as good at earning it as holding on to it. He was quite religious. He believed he had the secret pact of the Lord. In return for prayers and devotions he was exempted from doing good works. Bald, heavy-set, dressed in mourning, with his dark-lensed pince-nez and blonde beard, he was standing next to the window, awaiting the confidential report from operator Zunz. He saw her push open the gate, which he had left ajar on purpose, and cross the gloomy courtyard. He saw her make a small detour when the dog, tied up on purpose, barked. Emma's lips were moving, like those of a person praying under her breath. Weary, over and over they rehearsed the phrases that Senior Lowenthal would hear before he died. Things didn't happen the way Emma Zunz had foreseen. Since early the previous morning, many times she had dreamed that she would point the firm revolver, force the miserable wretch to confess his miserable guilt, explain to him the daring stratagem that would allow God's justice to triumph over man's. It was not out of fear, but because she was an instrument of that justice, that she herself intended not to be punished. Then a single bullet in the centre of his chest would put an end to Lowenfal's life. But things didn't happen that way. Sitting before Aaron Lowenthal, Emma felt, more than the urgency to avenge her father, the urgency to punish the outrage she herself had suffered. She could not kill him, after being so fully and thoroughly dishonoured. Nor did she have time to waste on theatrics. Sitting timidly in his office, she begged Lowenfall's pardon, invoked in her guise as snitch the obligations entailed by loyalty, mentioned a few names, insinuated others, and stopped short as though overcome by fearfulness. Her performance succeeded. Lowenfall went out to get her a glass of water. By the time he returned from the dining hall, incredulous at the woman's fluttering perturbation, yet full of solicitude, Emma had found the heavy revolver in the drawer. She pulled the trigger twice. Lowenfall's considerable body crumpled as though crushed by the explosions and the smoke. The glass of water shattered. His face looked at her with astonishment and fury. The mouth and the face cursed her in Spanish and in Yiddish. The filthy words went on, and Emma had to shoot him again. Down in the courtyard, the dog, chained to his post, began barking furiously as a spurt of sudden blood gushed from the obscene lips and sullied the beard and clothes. Emma began the accusation she had prepared. I have avenged my father, and I shall not be punished. But she didn't finish it because Signor Lowenfall was dead. She never knew whether he had managed to understand. The dog's tyrannical barking reminded her that she couldn't rest. Not yet. She mussed up the couch, unbuttoned the dead man's suit coat, removed his spattered pen snares, and left them on the filing cabinet. Then she picked up the telephone and repeated what she was to repeat so many times, in those and other words. Something has happened. Something unbelievable. Signor Lowenfall sent for me on the pretext of the strike. He raped me. I killed him. The story was unbelievable, yes, and yet it convinced everyone, because in substance it was true. Amazon's tone of voice was real, her shame was real, her hatred was real, the outrage that had been done to her was real, as well. All that was false were the circumstances, the time, and one or two proper names.